because you're about to listen to The Sick Podcast with Tony Marinaro.
No. It's with me, Matt Ohayon.
The sickest Montreal Canadiens podcast.
And now, a 24th Stanley Cup banner will hang from the rafters of the famous Forum in Montreal. The Canadiens win the Stanley Cup.
Brought to you by Energy Transportation Group. Driven to be different. 8.6 beer. Intense by nature. And Locage. If the last time you went to Locage was when the Habs won the Cup, it's time you went back to Locage. It's gonna be sick.
Good Friday evening, everyone out there listening. I am Matt Ohayon, filling in for the one and only Tony Marinaro. The Italian Stallion is out, as he usually is on Fridays. The Hebrew Hammer is in. Sick Podcast brought to you by 8.6 Beer, intense by nature. The beer for those who follow their instinct and live their passions in order to make their mark. On tonight's show, as you may have seen in the billings, on Twitter, on Facebook, I don't know if we put a YouTube promo out there, but he is from the Locked On Canadiens podcast and Habs Eyes on the Prize, mostly covering the Laval Rocket, but keeping an eye on the Montreal Canadiens as well. Scott Matla, how are you?
I feel bad. Before the show started, we were talking. I was like, okay, the Rocket are going to go to overtime 5 minutes before I've got to jump onto this show tonight. Lo and behold, they did that, snatching a point away from the Toronto Marlies. But I'm doing good. It's Friday night in Buffalo. The Bills play on Sunday. Plenty of beer in the fridge, and we are ready to go for the weekend. It's 75 and beautiful, so can't be beat.
Perfect. You know what? We're going to get to the Laval Rocket. Just quickly, before we jump into the Habs, though, you ever jumped through a table out in Buffalo?
No, I was on another podcast where I talked with professional wrestler Eric Young, and one of the questions I got a chance to ask him before the show was over is if I am going to jump through a table, how do I do that? And I was told, don't jump with your stomach down and tuck your chin so you don't hit your head. All of this is not legally binding advice, so if you get hurt, it is not his fault whatsoever.
Yeah, and I would imagine go for wooden table over plastic table. It's got to have more give. I mean, that's what I think.
Yeah, hard plastic in the winter in Buffalo is not a winning combination in any way, shape, or form. That hasn't stopped anybody at any of the games or just randomly on the street during the playoffs, but I am not most people who are doing that. I have a little bit of common sense to plan this out, I think.
A little bit is good. You don't want to have too much. You don't want to be too smart for your own good. So let's jump into the Canadiens. 2-1-1 on this 4-game road trip. I think surprising everyone, especially in that game against St. Louis, winning 7-4. Cole Caufield, a couple goals. Nick Suzuki, I think he had a goal and 2 assists, and Christian Dvorak, obviously with the most Christian Dvorak hat trick ever. So fast forward to this week, Canadiens lose last night. I mean, not the most entertaining game, but some things we can take out of it. I mean, I want to start with the captain. I mean, he just scored a beautiful goal in that game. Takes it to the net, goes around a defender, and just roofs it over Hellebuck. What's the biggest difference in your eyes from Suzuki last year to this year?
There's a swagger in Nick Suzuki's game that I think he's playing with a little bit of a chip on his shoulder in a good way. Not that he was written off or that people thought he isn't capable of this. He wears that C on his chest now. He's, been a captain. He's worn the A before. He knows that his game has to get to another level, and he's doing that offensively. He's just doing things, and he makes them look so natural. And his synergy with Cole Caufield on that top line is the one thing that we know is going on this team every single night is that Cole Caufield and Nick Suzuki, when they are on the ice together, are capable of making something magical happen in the blink of an eye. And I watched them play the little bump pass. The minute Caufield bumped it off to Nick Suzuki for that goal last night, you knew what was happening. He's got the space, and Nick Suzuki in space is a dangerous combination because he doesn't always look it, but he just pulls out something magical there. He rounds Dylan DeMello, gets around Hellebuck and roofs that, over him. It's beautiful. And watching him play with a tenacity and just utter skill every time he takes the ice. And people talk about underlying numbers, this or that. Puck's going in the net when he's on the ice, and he's just playing so well. I believe he's on a couple game point streak as it goes right now. That's what the Canadiens need this year. They're not supposed to be a good team, but seeing that progress from Nick Suzuki and Cole Caufield together is better than you could have hoped for at this point in the season, especially last year where nothing went right for anybody until Martin St. Louis got here.
Well, and that's kind of the question, because a new coach comes in, you're kind of, I'm talking last year, of course, you're kind of expecting that jump for the team for, a little bit at least, for a couple games. And then, that kind of fizzles out and you go back to what you are. And then, coming into this season, I think everyone, including their grandmothers, were expecting the Canadiens to be, in the Bedard sweepstakes, and they find themselves at 500 now, on pace for 82 points, which is completely out of it. I mean, it's not a playoff team, but it's completely out of it. So, I mean, is it fair to say that, this is, Martin St. Louis coming into this team was the best thing for Nick Suzuki and Cole Caufield?
I think a lot of it is that, and just modernizing the approach to the team a little bit. Is players are allowed to play to their strengths. It is no longer, and I'm someone who has a ton of respect for Claude Julien as a previous coach. It is no longer defense first and then this and then this. It is play to what you know is best right now. Nick Suzuki and Cole Caufield have been, told, go be creative, do what you do best, see how plays go from there. And that's allowing them to use what their hockey IQ at its best out there. And now the question is, can they find another person for that line that makes it work? And it looks like they've got Kirby Dach. Just modernizing the approach to the team is that it's let players be themselves. Don't try and make everyone the same thing that you can put square peg, square peg, square peg. It's everyone is a different fit on this team. Allowing them to, feel like they can play their style is important. Someone like an Arbor Jackeye in years past, it's like, okay, you're going to play defense first, puck off the glass and out. Don't try and carry it in this. Guys want to carry the puck. Guys want to get creative. Guys want to pinch. And that's important. Every good team allows players creative freedom to be the best they can be. And Martin St. Louis brought that out. It's most apparent in Nick Suzuki and Cole Caufield, because I don't think it's a debate. They're likely the two most talented players on this Canadiens team right now.
Yeah, and it's pretty clear. And the guy riding shotgun with them was Kirby Dach, and he looked pretty good. And I mean, you're over in Buffalo. There's a lot of Bills news to be consuming, but you keep a close eye on the Canadiens, of course, because you have to. Have you been noticing that? I mean, I've been noticing at least, some segments of the media have kind of been going at him. Kirby Dach, I'm talking about, as kind of like a new whipping boy for the Canadiens. Are you picking up any of that over in Buffalo?
I mean, I am, but at the same time, there's always a target at any point in the year, and it always shuffles. I look at it this way, is that he was the part of a huge trade. Kent Hughes made a splash at his first NHL draft. He traded a player a lot of fans liked, in Alexander Romanov, out of a defense that was unproven that he might have been a piece of the core in, at the NHL draft after picking Uri Slafkovsky. It's a lot of gamble. And I watch the way Kirby Dach plays, and I go, people can pick a whipping boy and all they want. Watching the way Kirby Dach plays, he with his reach and his size, he keeps plays alive. He gets to the right areas. He's consistent in what he does. And if he finds a home on that top line, that's great. If he finds a home in that top six, you're walking away from that trade at the draft already laughing that you have a 21-year-old center/winger. I think right now he's most effective as a winger. We can use his creativity still. And you're winning that trade at that point. It's young. He's part of this core. It's not like they traded for a 25, 26-year-old guy on his way out. They traded for someone entering their prime as a player, now with a coach who wants them to play to their creative freedom here. He played well alongside Sean Monahan to start the season. He's played well on every line he's been on. And we talk about Brendan Gallagher kind of being a Swiss Army knife and being able to play anywhere. Kirby Dach is proving that so far this season. And if he sticks on that top line, you're laughing at this point. That's 3 under 25 stars on your team to build around going forward after that.
Yeah, and I guess to bring it back to Connor Bedard is that, obviously he's a nice piece. This guy's a generational talent. Same thing with Michkov, same thing with Fantilli. But if you're not surrounding him with those pieces, you basically got Connor McDavid's situation over in Edmonton, where sure, he can carry you to the playoffs and his 120-point seasons are really nice, but when it all comes down to it, you kind of got nothing at the end when the games really matter. So, I mean, listen, we're still only 11 games into the season. I don't know about you. I'm not prepared to call this team a 500 team yet. I think some things are going to happen to diminish that point percentage.
The biggest thing out of that is, and God bless Samuel Montembeault, after everything he went through last season, playing with an injured wrist to get through the end of the season there, the goaltending will regress to what the mean is. I don't think Montembeault is going to stay as a .930 goalie. If he is, he might be one of the greatest free agent signings the Canadiens GM has ever made at this point. And that's going to regress. Some players are going to stop shooting a little bit less. Maybe the power play will go up. The penalty kill might dip a little bit. It's like you said earlier, they're 500 now on an 82-point pace. They're not a bad team. They're not horrific like they were last year or the Arizona Coyotes or Chicago Blackhawks of this year. But they're a team that's going to finish in that bottom 5 to 7 range just based purely on the fact that percentages are going to balance out. They're playing with 4 rookies on defense right now. And they're asking a lot of their young players, which is what you want in a rebuilding year. And the biggest part about that is, did you see improvement from the pieces you want to be stars next year and to be those leaders in the playoffs? Then you don't care where you finish this year. If Nick Suzuki finishes the year with 85 points and Cole Caufield gets 40 goals and Juraj Slafkovsky proves he's an NHL player, you don't care that you finished 7th from the bottom in the NHL or 5th from the bottom in the NHL. You saw the growth you needed in this team. And that's, and then you win a lottery and get someone like Adam Fantilli and you laugh afterwards anyways. But it's all a process there. It's not just a one thing only. It's not, we finished last, now we're good, we're going to be good again. You got to build up this season and not kind of let a rot sink in like was happening last year.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think, I guess the next part would be like, injuries are going to happen. Trades are going to happen. And like you said, the goaltending is going to regress. But I mean, I'm not seeing the cracks in the goaltending that I thought I would, because, everyone was saying last year, Jake Allen is the best backup. And, he was very good. And then Samuel Montembeault obviously has to step in as well. And it's just, I don't know. There's something about this goaltending tandem that I'm not prepared to say that that this is a duo going forward. It's obviously not. You need, a guy who's going to be playing 55 games. But you see these two guys battling, and I don't know. It just feels like there's something about them, especially in Montembeault, that's just noticeably different. Of course, he was injured at the end of last year, but just other than that, noticeably different in their demeanors and the way that they're playing.
Yeah, Samuel Montembeault last year had 2 settings. I'm going to let in this goal from 45 feet out that I should have saved, and you are not scoring a single goal, even if it causes my entire lower body to explode while I am making this save. And he's kind of channeled the you are no longer scoring a goal kind of thing into his game this year. He's using his body. He's a larger goaltender. He has the athleticism to make really good saves. His reads sometimes are a little wonky, which, okay, I'm not a goaltending expert. I'm not going to definitely criticize that. He makes the saves he needs to this year. And there are times that he kind of gets hung out to dry a little bit. And there's not much you can do on that. And Jake Allen is solid as always. When it comes to positioning, when it comes to settling the game down, Jake Allen is a perfect guy for this defense, because if things are getting rough, he's going to cover the puck and he's going to bring the temperature down a little bit. Whereas last year, everything is on fire all the time, just trying to get the puck out of the zone, whichever way. And doing that with the defense in front of them, now with Joel Edmondson coming back and hopefully Mike Matheson in the near future, there's a little bit more veteran leadership there too that's going to bring that down a little bit more. being able to just tone up that defensive structure in front of the goalies makes their lives easier, which makes the Habs' lives easier because the puck's not getting fished out of their net 6-7 times a game anymore. And I'm interested to see where Samuel Montembeault goes from here because he's got a 928 on the season. He's 2-1-1. Jake Allen's got a 908, but has obviously played the more difficult teams so far. And with Vegas on Saturday, I assume Allen will get the start in that game. It's going to be real interesting to see how they manage the workload there because if Montembeault keeps playing well, you can give him more starts, and it's not like you're worrying about it like you were last year at this point.
Yeah, no, it's funny you say it's fun. It's just funny you say worry because I don't think they were too worried about winning and losing last year. So I want to talk about this. We'll you know what, we're talking about goalies, so we'll get to this now, and then we'll go to the other subject. Just another point from last night. I know you talked about it for a little bit on your podcast episode that dropped this morning. How long are we going to have this goalie interference conversation? I knew I would get that reaction from you too.
It all depends on how long the NFL doesn't know what pass interference is either, but that's a different podcast topic.
Yeah.
I don't know what goaltender interference is. I don't. And I've tried to understand it, and I've tried to figure out what is the baseline for this. I can understand last night. Yes, Jonathan Kovacevic kind of shoved Blake Wheeler a little bit, and then Blake Wheeler still falls into Samuel Montembeault and has him pressed against the post when he sweeps the puck in. He didn't have to fall on top of him. He wasn't pushed that hard to do so until the NHL actually sets a baseline for this is the example of goaltender interference. Clearly, if you do this, we are overturning the goal every single time. We're never going to know. It changes from whoever's in the situation room on a given night to the officials who are on the ice looking at it and calling it goal, no goal. I don't know what the standard for goaltender interference is. I don't think a lot of the fans, media, anyone knows what the standard is for goaltender interference. And it's frustrating. What do you have to do to have it overturned or be a good goal? Because we famously go back to Chris Kreider dragging Carey Price out of his crease and that goal counting. But Brendan Gallagher bumps a goalie 30 seconds prior, and then the puck goes in, and that counts as goaltender interference. The standard is all over the place, given on players, teams, officials on the ice. The NHL, like the first thing they should be doing in any offseason is what is our standard for calling this? Because no one knows at this point. And you're just guessing. People say it's a joke when you flip a coin to figure out if it's goaltender interference or not. I don't really think that's a joke anymore because it ends up being true more often than not at this point.
Yeah, and you know what? It just seems like the NHL, more than any other league, is kind of more reactive than proactive on these things. So the thing where my mind goes to is, they implemented coaches' challenges on offsides after Matt Duchene is caught 7 feet offside. They don't call it. And, he scores a goal that he even stopped skating, and now we're measuring millimeters. So I feel like there kind of has to be that moment where a ref just has to screw it up so badly that, it's just they have no choice but to set a criteria. And I feel like that's why it's so much more frustrating in the NHL than it is in the NFL, because you can't challenge a pass interference. So you could see it on a replay. The next play happens and you kind of forget about it. Whereas this is a challengeable play. There should be criteria. When you challenge a catch, there's this whole famous football move. What's the hockey equivalent move of making an effort to get out of the way is, I guess, where they're going to have to, hammer that out. Thankfully that's not my job and not your job. But, it's just, how many of these are we going to see until, it's going to happen in a Stanley Cup final? And that's what it's going to take.
I am still waiting for that. An overtime Stanley Cup final with the cup on the line. Home team scores the game-winning goal, cup-winning goal. All the confetti and streamers and everything come down, and they go, we are looking at this for goaltender interference. And you have the world's most awkward pause between everything. And then they realize, well, that might be goaltender interference. And then they call that, and just the amount of trash that would likely be thrown on the ice after that would be astronomical. And because it's the NHL, it's entirely plausible that this is going to be a thing that happens to them. because
well, that's it. I mean, it's the way I see it going down also.
You reap what you sow. Is that you don't set a standard for it, eventually in a high profile situation, it's going to blow up in your face. And then you're going to be in front of the entire sports world where you are the focus at this time and have to go, well, we don't really know what goaltender interference is. So here you go. This is what you get now.
Exactly. It's just, there just has to be concrete rules. I mean, I just like, it's a shame because, on paper, video review should be the greatest thing ever and make things perfect as they should be. And it's just now we're measuring millimeters on offsides, and they'll set a new criteria for offside. I don't think it makes much of a difference. Anyways, let's go back to the beginning of the week for the Canadiens before we move on to the Laval Rocket, because I have some questions for you for some players over there. Evgenii Dadonov, this whole situation, he's hurt. He has a virus. He's placed on IR. Is he at practice? Is he not at practice? Martin St. Louis, I guess, blows up, if you could call it that, at reporters. I mean, do you just think that this whole situation is being overblown?
I mean, yeah. When things are going well, it's like we talked about with finding a whipping boy for something, is that there's got to be something that isn't going to what everyone expected. And I don't think there's anything sinister going on behind this. I think it's just a guy who, either isn't up to snuff for what they want right now, and they wanted to find cap space to get Joel Edmondson back in the lineup. Okay, you get creative with it. Or they thought maybe we would have moved other bodies out by now, and there's no problem cycling him in and out with a Rem Pitlick or a Yoel Armia, Jonathan Drouin. And it could just be we have to alter the plans as on the fly here. They have to be reactive instead of they were trying to be proactive before. At the end of the day, it's not anything sinister. I still think Evgenii Dadonov can be a very useful piece for this team. I think he's making the right reads and right plays, but he's a step behind where he needs to be on that. And I don't know if that's just game shape kind of thing, being under the weather, being injured. Who knows? I'm obviously not there. I am not Evgenii Dadonov or a Habs doctor or anything. I don't think needs to be as blown up as it has been, because this will pass in a week and something else will, take the limelight off of this, or he'll get traded. Who knows? Kent Hughes tends to pull things out of nowhere a lot of the time.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Because I'm watching this situation unfold, and I'm watching people, kind of not freak out over Martin St. Louis', uncharacteristic, we'll call it snarkiness rather than blowing up at reporters. But it's exactly what you said, everyone was expecting this team to be horrible, and they're not horrible. And, when the expectations are kind of in the basement, there's not really much that can go wrong. And this situation is going wrong. So it just feels like people are jumping all over it for a guy that, we were all celebrating as Canadiens fans were celebrating that they acquired and got Shea Weber's contract off the books. So, yeah, I agree with you also. I think he could be a very, very useful player going forward because, again, we're on the same page. I think he's making the right reads as well. Someone who was not making, well, at the beginning of the season seemed like he was, not processing the game as fast as he should, or we all hoped he would at one point, is Juraj Slafkovsky. Obviously turned it around. He looks pretty good out there whenever he is on the ice. But, still people sniffing around saying, oh, he's not quite that generational talent. I mean, he wasn't teed up to be. But, when you're a first overall pick, there's expectations that come with that. But how do you feel, covering the Laval Rocket, seeing how they're doing? Do you think a stint for him over in Laval would be good for him?
I wouldn't be opposed to it. And I want to preface this by saying him being demoted to the Rocket is not him playing badly in the NHL. It's giving him more ice time to work on the finer points of his game. He has a lot of things going for him. I watched him play at the rookie tournament in Buffalo, and you can see when he's going, he's making aggressive plays. He's using his body and his reach like we talked about with Kirby Dach. And sometimes there's some inconsistencies with that. He's 18 years old, barely. It's not all going to come together at once.
Mm-hmm.
And the Rocket, for as well as they've played, the record is now 2-6-2 on the season. They haven't played badly in a good chunk of these losses. They lost in overtime tonight, despite another 40-shot effort and a third period comeback. They are crying out for someone with a little bit of that finishing skill. And we saw it with Cole Caufield when he started in the AHL and even last year. He went down, put up a pile of points, and then came up and torched the NHL afterwards. Giving him a couple of games there, if, everyone is healthy and they need to make room for other players and whatnot, there's no issue with giving him a couple of games with the Rocket just to say, hey, we're going to send you down there. You're going to play in the top 6. You're going to play 15, 20 minutes a night, power play, whatever they need you to do. That's perfectly okay, because I think that will be good for his confidence. We saw after that game in Arizona where he scored his first goal and then unfortunately missed a couple of games, but then came back and scored another goal against St. Louis. He thrives on being confident. And if he's second guessing things, that's not the best for him.
Yeah. Again, agreed. I think it would be good. I mean, it's kind of a nature of like, that sometimes the AHL is kind of, in a weird way, it's kind of a harder league in some facets to play than the NHL, especially if you're an 18-year-old kid, first overall pick. It's a rougher league. Some guys might be, going after you. That's kind of my worry if it happens. But I think, just you're not going to learn things very well on the fly at the NHL level. I think, you're better suited to, you're still playing a fast game down in the AHL. It could be good for him. But anyways, the Rocket lost, by the way, today, 5-4 in overtime. Lucky to take a point. I mean, they came back in the last 2 minutes. I was watching this game, Scott, and I'm thinking, oh, great. This game's going to end. The Rocket are going to lose 4-2, and Scott's going to be able to come on and not have to worry about his game recap, could get some work done even before. No, they don't. They tie up the game in the last 2 minutes, drop it in overtime. But again, I said the record off the top, 2-7-2. Just very simply, what's going on down there?
They can't get a bounce to save their lives. And I know that sounds cliche and like an excuse. Watching this game tonight and the game they played on Wednesday, they did everything to put the puck in dangerous areas. Goalies made good saves, which they do. It's just puck went wide this way, deflected a little bit wide, deflected off a post. This game could have been 4-1 for the Rocket 10 minutes into the first period. And just when I say they could not buy a bounce to save their life, that top line of Jesse Ylönen, Raphael Harvey-Pinard, and Xavier Simoneau had so many good chances, and Brandon Gignac mixed in there as well. The chances were there, and they can't get a bounce. And then they're playing from behind because the other team gets a bounce off a skater in front. The hockey is good. They're playing very good, fluid hockey that you want to see. The game, they came back in the final minutes because of the way they played this game, and that tenacity finally paid off. If they got the bounces like they did on Raphael Harvey-Pinard's goal and then Xavier Simoneau's game-tying goal all night, this is a 7-2, 7-3 kind of laugher there. I know people want more out of them after their run through the playoffs last year, but I wouldn't be worried about this. The young guys are playing well. Caden Primo, iffy game to game. I don't think he's been terrible, but he hasn't been as good as he possibly could be. But you look at guys like Jesse Ylönen and Raphael Harvey-Pinard and Xavier Simoneau, Matthias Norlinder and Justin Barron, and they're playing well. They're playing big roles. It's like we talked about with the Habs with Caufield and Suzuki and Dach, is that even if the wins aren't there, but they're progressing along that development path, you're getting what you want out of this in the end. And these are guys that should see Xavier Simoneau, notwithstanding because he has an AHL contract, should see regular NHL time at points this year once bodies are shipped out, injuries hit like we talked about. That's all a huge possibility.
Sick Podcast brought to you by La Cage. If the last time you went to La Cage was when the Habs won the Cup, well, it's time you go back to La Cage. The menu will surprise you. And, just before I let you go, I actually wanted to bounce that off, and you kind of rattled off a couple names. So I guess I'll just ask it in this way. When those injuries and trades inevitably happen, who are you most excited to see at the NHL level?
Jesse Ylönen, very, very much is my top pick. I've given Mike Hoffman a lot of flack this year because I think Jesse Ylönen does everything he does better with effort and is younger. He has arguably the second best shot in the organization behind Cole Caufield. He has a wicked wrist shot, a heavy slap shot. He skates with speed and he's got great hands. And Raphael Harvey-Pinard is someone that Brendan Gallagher, if he took less penalties, same tenacity, drives the net, gets himself in those areas, wears number 11. He's a guy that I think fans are going to love. And then Xavier Simoneau is a bulldog, an absolute bulldog. When he gets his entry-level deal at the end of the season, and I will happily go on record saying he will get his entry-level deal at the end of this season, he's going to be someone that fans are going to love because he's fought dudes a foot taller than him this year already, and he scores big goals, makes things happen. Fans are going to love this guy. I highly recommend check out some of the Rocket games. Watch number 81. Just absolutely drive people nuts.
I love it. More of those sandpaper guys. They're kind of those are always fun to watch, especially to have on the team and get behind, rally around. Scott, just before I let you go, where can everyone find your work?
You can find my writing work at Habs Eyes on the Prize. I do cover the Rocket there. I make the highlights for games where fans from other teams yell at me about what happened in the game. I do cover the Habs there from time to time as well, depending on what's happening. And if you're looking for more of me in an audio or visual medium, please check out Locked On Canadiens, which is my show with my co-host, The Active Stick, at LO_Canadiens on Twitter. We'll have all the info you need there. So I am everywhere all the time until Twitter eventually crashes and burns inside the next month or so.
Yeah, we're all just very much looking forward to that. Again, another topic for a different podcast. Scott, thank you very much for doing this on a Friday night. Have a great weekend.
Thank you for having me, guys.
All right. It is Friday. You know what that means. Thank God it's football.
TGIF. Thank God it's Friday. It's also football with Matt Ohayon.
Burrow hooks a pass, wide open, chase, touchdown, Bengals.
No, don't worry, everyone. I'm not going to bore you with a 20-minute rant on how Zach Taylor's a terrible coach and that Joe Burrow has been able to shroud him being a bad coach for his tenure in Cincinnati. No, we'll talk a little NFL near the end of the show when I give you some betting picks. But it is Friday, which means there's football coming up on the weekend, and there's a CFL playoff game going on in our city for the first time since 2019. That's right. The Montreal Alouettes are playing host to the Hamilton Tiger Cats in the East semifinal. And who better to talk Alouettes with than the Alouettes' own Joey Alfieri. Joey, how are you?
What's up, buddy? How you doing?
I'm good, man. It's good to see your face. I haven't seen that mug in a while.
Yeah, I wish I could say the same, but here we are.
Yeah, no, it's okay. All right, Joe. Let's just get down to brass tacks here. The Alouettes have a head-to-head record against this Hamilton Tiger Cats team of 2-1 this season. Most recently, won 23-12, but they also most recently lost in the playoffs 23-12 to this Hamilton Tiger Cats team. I mean, everyone's talking about the run game. Do you see it that way? Do you think that's going to be the big dominant factor on both sides of the football?
Yeah, well, look, I think it's interesting, right? Like you mentioned, the games have been so tight. Like Montreal won 2 out of 3. But if you look back at the playoff game that you're talking about last year in the East semifinal, which was played in Hamilton, I mean, it was tough. The Alouettes became very one-dimensional in that game because they couldn't run the ball. And it was snowing, it was cold, so it wasn't ideal throwing conditions by any stretch. But they made the game interesting late. But I think this is one where I'm with you. I think as cliche as it is, I think the battle of the trenches is going to be big. I think the Owls' offensive line is going to need to be efficient in pass protection. I think you're going to need help from your tight ends and your running backs as well in that respect. But I think running the football well on first down is going to open up the passing game. I think the Owls are one of the few CFL teams that are kind of, if you want to call them, traditional that way. Is that they still use the run to open up the pass. And when I say run, I mean run can be a quick pass in the flat or a hitch pass to either side of Trevor Harris. Like in the CFL, that's in my mind that's a run too. Like that's like Mark Trestman always used to say. You don't necessarily have to hand the ball off to run the ball. So I'm with you. I think that's going to be a big factor in this one. At the same time, the Tiger Cats I think have the number one defense against the run, and they have a real good front seven. But I think if you see Williams stand back at 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 carries, I think it's probably a good sign. It means Montreal's ahead.
Well, there's also two other guys out there in that backfield in Joshua Antwi and Fletcher. That's the being billed as the three-headed monster. And, you mentioned, throwing the ball out in the flat and how that's kind of an extension of the run game. I see it the same way, but in a kind of maybe a little bit of a nuanced way. You're also giving your chance to your playmaker in a one-on-one situation to just make a guy miss and grab a couple extra yards. Is that something that they're going to be looking to do a little bit more of rather than just, crash and bang in the line through the, try to find a hole in the offensive line?
Yeah, look, I think it's a reasonable point. I think if you look at their offense, the way they've done it all year, they try to get their speed guys out there, like you said, make somebody miss. Whether it's a couple of the Canadian boys like Keon Julian Grant or Tyson Philpott, those are the guys that you usually hit on those quick passes out wide. So they've had some success there doing that, and I think if they have a hard time running the ball between the tackles, I think you'll probably see them do that as well.
Well, so we mentioned last year's game and that they had trouble, throwing the ball in that game because of, it just became so one-dimensional. And I feel like that kind of followed into the beginning of this year. So I want to take you to the beginning of the year. The Alouettes are in a lot of trouble, losing games by undisciplined was the hot topic and the key word of the season. Yeah. And then they obviously Kahari Jones gets let go and things kind of take a turn for the better. And all in the middle of this is Trevor Harris. What's his progression like from season's beginning to now been for you? Can you take us through that?
Honestly, I think he's been good the whole way. I don't understand. I know there's been, there's a section of the fan base that isn't enamored with him. And I mean, I don't get it. I understand that some people prefer a running quarterback. But Trevor Harris, for the most part, gets the ball out of his hands quick. He's careful with the ball. I mean, every quarterback throws interceptions, but he has a nice touchdown to interception ratio of 20-12. I think he's thrown one pick in the last 5 games or whatever. I mean, I don't get it. I don't understand the hate. I understand that there are quarterbacks out there that might be a little flashier or sexier in the way that they play. But I don't know. To me, Trevor Harris is efficient. I think you can win with Trevor Harris. No problem there. Is the offense perfect? No, I don't think that's just on the quarterback, though. I think they do have to execute in the red zone a little bit better than they have over the last few weeks anyway. But to me, I mean, I think he's been pretty consistent. I mean, he didn't start week 1 or week 2, came in the second quarter of the second game of the season, and there's been ups, there's been downs, but I think you also have to measure his impact off the field. They've called a couple of player-only meetings, and I know that he's a big part of that. He's a big part of the leadership committee within the Alouettes locker room. So, to give you an example, Matt, they called a players-only meeting before the game in Winnipeg when they were 2-6. And they're still, to this day, the only team this season to beat the Blue Bombers in Winnipeg. So, I mean, that's the game that got everything turned around. And the turnaround isn't all on Trevor Harris, but I feel like he's a big part of it. And again, I don't understand why people can't appreciate the guy's game.
Yeah, I feel like it's like you said, there's a couple things that go into it, which is 1, he's not that sexy running quarterback. And also 2, let's call a spade a spade. The guy's getting up there in age. I mean, CFL quarterbacks age differently than other position players, but he's a guy who's been around the league before. And I just, the sense that I'm getting from the fan base is, that nobody kind of really, I don't want to say cares what happened in the regular season. The thing that's kind of still hanging over everyone's heads is that loss in Hamilton and just, the inability to move the ball in that game. I feel like that's where a lot of these things come from. Trevor Harris is right-hand man.
They were manhandled up front. They were manhandled up front in that game. I mean, you can put some of the blame on Trevor Harris. And again, I feel like we're talking about the same issues, but they settled for field goals early in that game. They had a lead after the first quarter. They fell apart in the second quarter, but I don't know. I have a hard time blaming Trevor Harris for that. The offensive line was particularly banged up. And, you had a couple guys in there on the left side of the line that are no longer in Montreal. They were traded or released.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that it's going to come down to wins and losses in the playoffs. Montreal have won a playoff game since 2014, but you can't dispute Harris has been very efficient. He's taking care of the football for the most part this year. And okay, he doesn't run, but I mean, there's other ways to win games, especially in the CFL. And I know he's 36. I get that. But he only really started playing at the age of 29, 30. So, it's not a guy who's been starting games since he was 21, 22 years old. He had to wait patiently behind some really good quarterbacks. So, is he, 7 years, a long time to be a full-time player for the most part in the Canadian Football League? Yeah, sure. But I still think he's got some good football ahead of him. I don't think he's done.
Yeah, and you know what? We talk so much. He's not a traditional running quarterback, but man, I some plays are sticking out in my head where I've seen him use those. I've seen him use those legs. It looks like he's got the juice out there sometimes.
He's got the
at least in the legs. Yeah, he's got the juice in the legs. Another guy who's got the juice is Eugene Lewis. This guy has had. I mean, it's been a career year for Eugene. So, just in your eyes, again from last year. I mean, it just kind of wasn't a full season. I feel like he really broke onto the scene last year as that number one guy. But from last year to even this year, how much has he progressed in his game to be the player he is?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of years he's been dominant. I think if you go back to the back half of 2019, there's been talk, now it's coming out that, the Owls nearly cut him in 2019. I had heard that he was potentially on the move via trade. I don't know if that's confirmed or not, but, in the end, it didn't end up working out. And he seemed to take off after that. And he's just, he's not the guy who's necessarily going to blow by you with speed. It's not his game. But at the same time, I mean, he can get up the field quick enough. And then once he gets, he's going to high point the ball. He's going to out physical you in those 50-50 balls. I mean, they don't seem 50-50 at all. I think he likes to call them 90-10. But, he has a leaping ability. He's a guy who isn't shy, to take contact, and he rarely gets blown up. So, I mean, he's a complete receiver. Maybe, again, like we said, maybe the speed's missing. But to me, those hands are money. And you look at what he's done to the Tiger Cats this year. I mean, he absolutely carved them up. Even in the playoff game last year, like he went into that game banged up. At halftime of that game, he had one reception for 2 yards, and he finished with like 127 or 129 or something ridiculous like that. And then this year, I think it's 3 games. It's 22 receptions, 305 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Like he's just absolutely filthy. Absolutely filthy. So, I think a big part of the offense is going to have to go through him. He and Trevor have a chemistry that's undeniable. But I do think that this team is very dangerous when they spread the ball around. When you have, it hasn't been uncommon this year for them to go ahead and move the ball to 7, 8, 9 different receivers, or at least, 7, 8, 9 different receivers get targets throughout games. So peppering Geno Lewis with targets is never a bad idea. But I think if you can spread the ball around and, Mayala's involved and Philpott's involved and Winicki's involved, Julian Grant's involved, you get Walter Fletcher involved, who you mentioned earlier in the passing game out of the backfield. That's when I think that you can get Hamilton on their heels. And then at that point, if they have to load up the box to stop the run, that's where you can hurt them with a bunch of different receivers. But to get back to your original point, I mean, Geno Lewis has been absolutely sick. Like he's been so good for a couple of years now, and I anticipate that that's going to continue because, like I said, he's had success in the playoffs before.
Yeah, and he's finally just the way you were describing him in all of his, because obviously you see him firsthand, you see him so up close every week in, week out. Just the way, and I'm not just trying to throw a Bengals comp into there, just to make it seem like I know what I'm talking about. But it sounds a lot like T. Higgins, just a guy that doesn't have that breakaway speed, but you're tossing a ball up to him, he's going to fight you off the ball. And it's like you said, it's not a 50-50 really. It's kind of a 90-10 kind of deal. Let's talk about the other side of the ball, the defense. They're not getting too much attention just because of all the weapons that are on this Alouettes offense. I mean, Dane Evans, kind of similar trajectory this season I'm talking about as Trevor Harris in terms of the last 5 games, not turning the ball over. what does this Alouettes defense have to do? Who does it start with? And, who are you circling on your depth chart that, okay, this guy needs to have his big defensive performance?
Yeah, well, look, I think with Dane Evans, in fairness, people are going to say, 16 interceptions. I think that led the league. He lost 8 fumbles. I think that led the league too. But like you said, he's actually cleaned it up quite a bit down the stretch. I think they're going into this game on a 4-game winning streak. I know they've struggled pretty badly on the road, but if they get the quarterback play, that they're capable of getting, last year he didn't play in the playoffs. 2019, he helped lead them to the Grey Cup. Or the Grey Cup final, they lost to Winnipeg and Calgary. I mean, you kind of never know what you're going to get with Dane Evans, but when he runs hot, he runs hot. Look, I think I'm really curious to see the physicality that the linebackers can bring in this game. Obviously, the defensive line is going to be huge, but the guys like Darius Pickett, Chris Aki, Tyrese Beverette, those are the guys that typically will set the tone for this Alouettes defense. You see Pickett come off the edge on blitzes a lot. He's going to have to make sure that he gets to the quarterback. And there's sometimes he's going to have the clear path and sometimes he won't, but he's going to have to make life difficult for Dane Evans in that sense. And look, not having Micah Awe, who since he's come in, he's played really, really well at middle linebacker. Unfortunately, he's banged up for this game. He's not going to play. But, Chris Aki's a veteran. He's not typically a middle linebacker, but he looked reasonably, comfortable enough last week in Toronto, had an interception in that game as well. So I think I'm looking at that linebacker trio. I mean, it's not to say that there's guys in the secondary and guys on the defensive line that aren't important, but if you're asking me for who I'm circling, I'm looking at that linebacker trio, and they're going to have to find a way to set the tone physically in that game.
Yeah, and you mentioned Chris Aki, and he's not traditionally a linebacker, more of a defensive back. But I think that's one of the unique things about this Alouettes defense is that their linebackers typically, have either, back to the days of, Diamond Ferry or these are physical guys, but now they've moved to speed and physical. It's kind of a unique thing about the Alouettes defense. I find I'm always just very impressed with the linebacker play because of the speed they bring at the second level.
Yeah, listen, I think Noel Thorpe and Byron Archambault, defensive coordinator and linebacker coach, I think they've done a really good job coaching these guys up this year. They've put these guys in a position to succeed. People forget, Tyrese Beverette was a guy who was signed to be, he's a free agent from Hamilton, a guy who had a little bit of NFL experience, but, he was a backup will linebacker in Hamilton with the Tiger Cats the last couple of seasons. Comes to Montreal and he's had a career year. He's been amazing. Now everybody loves Darius Pickett. Last year, there was a portion of the media that was trying to run him out of town because, he did take some penalties at some bad times. But it's tough to be in that position. Last year, he was all over the defense. There was times he would play the Sam linebacker spot. There's times they'd put him at defensive back, times they put him at safety. He was moving around all over the field. He didn't have one spot. And this year, they've kept him at the Sam linebacker spot. And I thought he had an all-star caliber year. I was thinking that he was going to make the all-star team. He didn't. But they found places for these guys, and they fit in really nicely. And then Aki's been a will linebacker. He did play safety a little bit at the beginning of his career, but he's a will linebacker for the last few years. Now they're forcing him. Now he's being forced into that middle linebacker spot, and he's a guy who's been there, done that. So I'm not really worried for him. I'm curious to see because they have a 30 front. They run 3 defensive linemen for the most part. I'm curious to see if the linebackers can fill the gaps. They can stop the run effectively because that's been, that's I wouldn't say Achilles heel, but that's been something that they've lacked consistency with is stopping the run. But I like the linebackers. I like the group that they have. I think they're well coached, and I think they're talented guys. And so I would expect those guys, like I said before, I think those guys need to set the tone physically for this group.
Sick Podcast brought to you by Energy Transportation Group. It is an asset-based logistics provider offering outstanding service at incredible rates, serving all of North America. Energy Transportation Group offers full-service logistics support.
Hey, by the way, is Tony tied up somewhere in the back? What's going on here? Why am I not talking to Marinaro?
I mean, are you don't like talking to me, or what's going on?
I do, but I thought I was going to talk to Tony. That's why I came on.
Yeah, even though I'm the one who texted you there, that's good.
Yeah.
But no, Tony is a bit of his words, not mine.
Yeah.
And Yellow and Sammy can attest to this.
Yeah.
He said it himself. He's a diva. He needs his Fridays off.
Okay.
He needs his Fridays off.
That's
so
all right.
he gave me a call and said, "Hey, I need you to do the Fridays." And I said, "Okay." And Yellow and Sammy will pay me way more handsomely than you get paid, because you'll see, I'm going to take your job soon. Anyways. So you spoke about Darius Pickett and penalties. That's where I wanted to go. We don't have to spend a ton of time on it, because I feel like it's been a hot topic at the beginning of the season. One of the reasons why, or at least it was stated why Kahari Jones was let go, was the discipline issues. And then they kind of continued into Danny Machocha's beginning of his stint. Has that kind of, I don't want to see it be a thing of a past, because every team takes penalties, especially in the CFL, but is that something that's been subsided?
I think it's been a roller coaster, honestly. Like, I think there's been some ups and there's been some downs. I think there's a lot of, and it's funny, like when you don't take penalties, nobody mentions them, right? Like nobody says like, "Oh,
right.
Good job, you didn't take penalties." It's just like you're expected to not take penalties. But then when you do take penalties, it's like, "Oh, well, why is everybody taking penalties?" I mean, look, one of these 3 games will stand out. August the 20th, the Owls won on a walk-off 48-yard field goal by David Cote. They won by a point. And the only reason that game was close is because the Owls, I think they took like 190 yards in penalties in that game. There was like 2 roughing the kicker penalties. So it's something that they're gonna have to keep in check. And if I'm not mistaken, Hamilton took like 125 yards in penalties in that game or something like that. It was absurd. Like the number of penalties taken in that game were absurd. So I don't think you wanted to get to that point. Like, I don't think you want to give the referees an opportunity to be the difference here or there in this game on Sunday. And typically in the playoffs, I think, for the most part, they should let the guys play. I think they typically do let the guys play, and they try not to be I don't want to say as big a factor, but I think it's like any other league. You try to let things go. You try to let the teams on the field determine what happens. But I think, to get back to your question, I think I think it's been, for lack of a better term, like I think it's been regular. Like there's some games where, they go over 100 yards in penalties, and some games where they're at like 35, 40. I think it's just like the ebbs and flows of a season. I don't think this is, an undisciplined group. Like I think the Saskatchewan Roughriders this year, I think that was an undisciplined group. I think the Owls in that sense have figured it out. But there have been weeks where the penalty numbers spike, and then there's other weeks where they're down below 50. So I don't think it's an epidemic. I don't think it's a huge problem that they have. But at the same time, it's worth mentioning that they can't take silly penalties to extend drives, because that has been a problem at different times this year. So if they can keep that clean, I think that's a big step in making progress towards the East Division final against Toronto the following week.
Right. And, just for the NFL fans that don't watch a lot of CFL that are listening and watching us, just to let you know, the 100 yards in penalties is like standard across CFL. The refs throw flags.
I don't know about standard. I don't know. Well,
I mean, I find refs throw flags, pretty often in this league, and not a knock. I mean, it's I will always say this to all my friends who bash on the CFL. They have the best rules. Make pass interference reviewable. If you're gonna open that Pandora's box, the CFL did it.
Well, that actually happened. You know how that started, right? There was a playoff game in Guelph between Montreal and Hamilton a few years ago. I was there. It was windy as heck. And there was a pass interference missed in the Hamilton end zone that would have given Montreal the ball on the 1-yard line. The referees missed it, wasn't challengeable at the time. It was on Duron Carter. And then that offseason, I think they decided to make pass interference reviewable. They've tweaked it along here and there. I think at first you were literally able to challenge, every illegal contact on a receiver. But now I think they've done what they can. It is a gray zone. Every referee has their own kind of standard. When they go back to the war room in Toronto, I think there's a lack of consistency sometimes, but I think that's to be expected. Like, it's hard to have that same standard. Every pass interference is kind of different. I think they've done a really good job with it, to be honest with you. But yeah.
No, I'm in complete agreement with you, because every time there's a clearly missed interference in the NFL, I'm thinking, in the back of my head, throw the flag. Oh, wait, you can't. You're you're not in the CFL, because it's one of those things that I like about the CFL is that they don't put everything, they don't say, let's trust the referees and we'll have a security blanket here. Okay. Last question before I let you go, because we only have about 5 minutes left and I'm getting tired. And I appreciate you doing this on a Friday night, by the way. Okay. Just lay out the ground. Someone's watching this game for the first time. What can they expect from this Alouettes team? What can they expect from the matchup in general?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a hard fought. I think it's going to be close. Like, I really don't see either side blowing the other side out. Like we mentioned before, they played 3 times in the regular season this year. They played once in the preseason, and every single time they played, the point differential was 7 points or fewer. There was a couple games where it was 7 points, and then there was one game where it was 1 point. I think it's going to be really hard fought. I think it's going to be a nail biter. I don't know, I don't think this is going to be like a 45-42 kind of game. I think it's going to be a little more low scoring than that. I just think that physicality is gonna win. I think the team that can protect their quarterback, the team that can run the ball effectively, and we've seen both teams do those things, and then both teams struggle with those things as well. I think that's the team that's going to win. So I think it's the Alouettes by a couple of points. But I do think that this one's going to go down to the wire. It wouldn't surprise me if the last team with the ball ends up winning, even though it's not a shootout.
All right, so I'm taking down your notes, and just like last time, I went to a game and I texted you. I will be blaming you for taking, if it doesn't hit, Alouettes -3. And
is it -3 now? I thought it was 2.5.
It got bumped up to minus. The last I saw it was -3. It's kind of different all over the place.
It's because of this hit. It's because I just said the Alouettes are going to win, so Vegas just, they adjusted the numbers. This is the kind of power we have on a sick podcast.
That's right. Don't you forget it. So Alouettes -3, under 49.5. And I mean, we didn't mention it, but the weather will play a factor, because it started off at the beginning of the week. It was supposed to be a beautiful day for football, 20 degrees and sunny. Now all of a sudden I check my phone and it says I'm going to be sitting outside in 5 to 10 millimeters of rain. So that might play a factor as well.
But from the last I saw, though, I think that it might stop right before kickoff, is what somebody told me a couple hours ago. I mean, look, if it is wet, I think those are conditions that probably favor the Alouettes, because you're probably going to ground and pound a little bit more. We talked about the 3 running backs, but don't discourage people from coming, because I do think that by the time kickoff goes, I think the rain will have stopped, if I'm not mistaken. That's what I have, but I'm just going off like Meteo Media.
Yeah, well, that's what I was doing as well. We don't have I don't have eyes in the sky like some people do. But Joey, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Hope to see you on Sunday. I know you're going to be busy running all over the place. So if you have the time, it would be appreciated to say hello to your friend once in a while. But no, in all seriousness, thanks for doing this tonight, and good luck to you and the guys on Sunday.
Thanks, buddy. Thanks for having me.
No problem. All right. We have not that much time left, so let's just get to it right now. Sick Picks presented by Betway.
It's time for Sick Picks, brought to you by Betway.
All right. So TGIF, thank God it's football. I'm going to be focusing. A lot of my picks will be football based, but I'll give you one right off the bat that I like. I know we talked to Scott Matla, and the Canadiens are playing really well right now. I just don't see this continuing, especially against a big team like Vegas. They're 9-2 on the season, heavy favorites, probably not as heavy as they should be. So that's the time to take advantage. 9-2 on the season. I'm going Vegas, and I do think this is one of those games where the Canadiens, it's going to happen this season, so get used to it. They're going to get smacked by the big boys. So I'm going to take Vegas and over 6.5 goals there. That pays just under 3-1 at 2.95. And now for the NFL Sunday. Full disclosure, I have won my picks the past 2 weeks in a row, made some money. It's really nice. And now that nobody asked me for my picks, But now that I'm winning, Sammy and Agnello asked me for my picks. And, I'm going to be made to look like an idiot when these eventually and inevitably don't hit. So 2 things that really piqued my interest were the Minnesota Vikings on the road as 3.5-point underdogs to the Washington Commanders. I really don't understand this. Minnesota is 6-1. I understand that they're not dominating teams like other teams of that caliber are doing, notably the Eagles, who are blowing teams out left and right, the Bills, who are blowing teams out left and right. Minnesota keeps it tight because, frankly, they're not the most talented group out there, but they are what their record says they are. They're 6-1. Washington is a bad football team. Give me Minnesota minus 3.5. Parlay that with Seattle plus 2.5 on the road in Arizona. Seattle has been getting no love this year from anybody. And only now people are starting to sniff around. Oh, the Seahawks may be for real. You know what? I don't think they're going to win that division, frankly, because I think that the 49ers just have an unbelievable roster. And, with the bye week this week, they're going to put it all together and they're probably going to take the division. But Arizona is another divisional team and they stink. I have no faith in Kyler Murray. I have no faith in Cliff Kingsbury. And I just have no faith in anyone else on that offense until Hollywood Brown comes back and then they are at full strength. Give me Seattle. Parlayed with Minnesota. Seattle are 2.5-point underdogs. I would even take the money line on Seattle. That's what I'm doing. And just a little note for you. I'm going to give you 2 more things. One of them is a pick, and one of them is kind of a rule of thumb. I don't know if you guys saw this, but this past week, a video surfaced. I forget on which Instagram account it is. One of the betting ones. It might have been Bleacher Report betting. Anyways, it doesn't matter. There's a new rule, or not a new rule, but there's someone studied trends over NFL teams that are double-digit favorites over other teams. 65% of the time, when a team is a double-digit favorite, that game will go under. It's probably a bad time to bring up that rule, considering that the Eagles and Houston Texans went over yesterday. But general rule of thumb is when one team is build to blow out another team, they're going to take their foot off the gas at one point. So just bear that in mind. If you're looking at the Chiefs versus the Titans, and where the Chiefs are 12.5-point favorites on Betway, and bear that in mind when you're looking at Bills versus Jets, where the Bills are 12-point favorites. So just keep that in mind. And hey, one more football game for you. We talked CFL. We talked NFL. Why not talk college as well? Just really quickly, shout out to Jer Held and Charles Moati, who will be going to the college game of the year. These are 2 of my buddies. Going to the college game of the year. Georgia, number 3 in the country, playing host to number 1 Tennessee. You're not going to see this very often, where a number 3 team is a favorite, a pretty heavy favorite over a number 1 team. But hey, this is based off of no statistical analysis. But if you want to ride with me, and I'm hoping my friends have a good time down there, I hope Georgia will cover that spread. But that will also, it's a big spread, but it's not a double-digit spread. It's going over. Thank you guys for listening. Tony will be back on Monday. Peace.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast with Tony Marinaro on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts. The Sick Podcast is brought to you by Energy Transportation Group, driven to be different, 8.6, intense by nature, and La Cage. If the last time you went to La Cage was when the Habs won the cup, it's time you went back to La Cage. The menu will surprise you.